you operate about 1,200 hotels in 20 countries in the Asia-Pac region. Give us a sense of how your hotels have been impacted by the pandemic, how they're doing compared to other regions like the US, Europe, Latin America.
Well, good morning, Haslinda. It's nice to speak with you again. Needless to say, it's a terrible time for our industry. We've been impacted probably more than any other industry, the hotel along with the airline industry. Pretty much the entire world is suffering, no question. There's very few bright spots. Fortunately, the one bright spot in the world which is in our region is China. And, of course, that's the number one question I'm getting at the moment is what's happening in China, because everyone's looking to that as some sort of telltale sign for the future.
So what kind of telltale signs are there? What kind of recovery are you expecting in China, and will that be a reflection of the rest of the world?
Yeah, look, it's fixed in China, of course, but it's definitely rebounding, no question. I mean, February was the bottom in China. It was single-digit occupancies across the country. March, we managed to climb into the teens, but it was, the second half of March was better than the first, and April is better again. And certainly, as I said, it varies around the country. Like Beijing, for example, it's still relatively shut. That if you go to Beijing, you have to serve a 14-day quarantine. Even as a resident, if you leave and go back, you serve a 14-day quarantine. The other larger cities like Shanghai and Guangzhou are still opening up. But when you go into the more regional areas, the hotels are performing better. And certainly the economy and mid-scale at the moment is performing better than the luxury. And then also what's very encouraging is food and beverage in the hotels is bouncing back, particularly the restaurants that have private dining rooms, particularly the Chinese restaurants. We're seeing a steady increase in our covers there. So there's, it's still early days, but there's no question there's positive signs that we're seeing in China.
Michael, what kind of measures have you been forced to adopt while waiting for that recovery to happen? Have you had to cut staff, put them on no-pay leave? What are some of the measures you've adopted?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has varied. I mean, around the world, of our 5,000 hotels, more than 3,000 are closed. In Asia Pacific, of the 1,200 hotels, roughly, say, 400 of those are in China, which are now all open. About 300 of the 900 have closed. Of course, then we have had to furlough a great portion of our teams. The safety nets around the region, in a region like Asia Pacific, varies significantly. We're doing everything we can to look after those teams. In fact, Accor has launched a 70 million euro fund to do our best to look after our team members. Those are in particularly dire straits. But it is tough times. There's no question. Our industry, as I said, has been one of the worst impacted.
Michael, looking outside of China, what are hotel occupancy rates like in places like Singapore and Hong Kong? And on top of that, what are we looking at for revenue per available room, or RevPAR?
Yeah, look, Singapore is probably a little bit better than most, and that's because the government's actually quarantining returning citizens in hotels, and they are actually paying for those citizens to stay in the hotels. But again, at that vastly reduced rates, across, again, if you take China out, anticipating April to be, in the teens across the region in terms of occupancies, and really there are no bright spots. As I said, Singapore probably performing better at the moment because of the government business. That's happening in other places like Australia as well, but that's a smaller piece of the business because only the major capital cities like Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, where you have that returning business. So it is very poor. I mean, most of the region is in lockdown, and it's actually prohibited to go to a restaurant. It's prohibited to go to a hotel. So as you can imagine, it is quite dire at the moment.
In times like this, you of course have this pipeline of hotels opening, don't you, Michael? Are you seeing any postponement of that pipeline? And second part of my question will be, these are always times to learn and take stock as well as you look at the business. And are there things which you've learnt from these shutdowns, these lockdowns in various cities that you perhaps see as improving culture, improving workflow patterns, etc., post the pandemic?
Well, in terms of the pipeline, yes, we have an enormous pipeline of almost 500 hotels in Asia Pacific. And we're not seeing canceled projects, but certainly we'll see a slowdown in opening if for no other reason that a lot of construction sites are closed. Whether they close for a month or two or three, that will slow down openings. And then there'll be some supply issues later in the year in getting your furnishings delivered and other items. And then there'll be a credit crunch for some projects. But we anticipate the majority to still open, and those more of a delay as opposed to cancellation. In terms of learnings, really,
Michael.
Not really. No. Yes, sorry. Yes,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in terms of learnings, honestly, hope that we never face anything like this again. There'll be some things that we'll need to do differently upon reopening. But, when you go from 80s and 90% occupancies to 10s and 20s, it's a completely different world. And it's not running the same business at all. In fact, you're barely running a business, so you don't take a lot out of it. In terms of, I actually think our hygiene is of the highest standard, so there's not much that we'll do there. There'll be some just like after 9/11, where you had more tight security at our hotels. I think what we'll find is not so much a heightened sense of hygiene, because as I said, it is already very, very strong, but it'll be around, are we taking temperatures on guests coming and going from the hotel, thermal imaging, those type of things. Until a vaccine comes along, I think our industry will be very different.
Michael, the Accor Group recently redirected its focus to Asia and to luxury. Do you see this pandemic forcing Accor to tweak or change its strategy, especially given that we're expecting a deep recession?
Look, I don't see it as a change of strategy, because you have a strategy for a long term. No question initially, and we're already seeing that in China, that the economy of mid-scale, which is still a very big part of our business, I think will perform better in the first 6 months post-pandemic. But over the longer term, I expect the whole business to come back, right? And it's still, I think, the right strategy. We have a balanced strategy. And also, I think you'll also find, as we come out of the pandemic, there'll be a lot of pent-up demand. Whilst it's terrible times and we have high unemployment, we also have people that are actually still working hard, and they have nothing to spend their money on. They're not going out to dinner. They're not going shopping. They're not traveling, and they're going to be looking for experiences when the pandemic ends. Now, it's not going to lift and all of a sudden go back to the way we were before. I think it'll be gradual, and there'll be different parts of the business that comes back faster than others. But luxury will always be sought after. I think the idea that the world's going to be significantly different post-pandemic I personally don't believe that. I do think the first few months or possibly a year will be, but beyond that, I think we'll start to see patterns return to what they were prior to the pandemic.
And that's what I wanted to get at, Michael, to ask you when things are going to improve for the business is a ludicrous question. Nobody knows the answer to that. But what part of the business, what segment do you think will actually be the first to benefit?
Yeah, well, there's no question that what you'll see is shorter travel, so to speak. That in terms of volume, the first thing you'll see is people drive because they feel safe, and they'll stay within their state if it's a large country, and then they'll travel interstate and within their own country. International travel will come back more slowly. Large meetings will come back more slowly because and you saw restrictions tighten over time you'll see those restrictions loosened over time as well. So the ability to have meetings over 100 people, that won't come until there's a lot of certainty around where the pandemic hits. But so that's the pattern that I see. Drive, close, staycation, interstate, international. But I do, you'll probably see a little bit stronger rebound quickly in the economy mid-scale. But as I said, there is pent-up demand for the luxury as well. So I think there will be people, that will be very excited, that live in Singapore, that have never stayed there. That say, this is a good chance to stay at Raffles. And I see the luxury segment recovering while slowly. I do see that will also be some benefit as well.